in this city, beneath 6,000 miles of streets that lead in every direction, the subway roars on steel ribbons of track that daily speed millions of riders within the dream. And from underground to under sky, from heliports on river's edge, craft rise to sail the oceans of the sky above the city. Sail high above where once great forests stood, and in their place, now great buildings stand, housing the dreams that men have built. And road and highway speeds the traffic that roars within the city, takes it, twists it in, out, and under, leads it from all the streets, and feeds it from all the tunnels to all the bridges, linking all the parts of the city to each other, and so in turn joins the city to the state, to the nation, and the world. Here within the multi-leveled city, a city that has risen as if by magic out of the very waters that surround it, a greater city has emerged, a city where new harbors are anchored on the land, harbors whose seas flow through space, highways that girdle the earth's shape to bring all the cities of the earth ever closer to the city of the world and to its dream. Taller than the great city itself, than the towers of stone and steel that fill it, stand the great land harbors, airports that serve the world and the flagships of the nations of the world.
348, the chopper's rolling, will be United DC-6. I'll get him into position, so your chopper touches down, he'll be making immediate takeoff.
Here, the largest commercial airports in the world, with the greatest air terminal facilities in the world, welcome the air fleets of the nations and of their cities. Welcome their people, their business, their friendship.
Flight 930, street service for Paris and Rome. Now boarding passengers, gate number 11. All passengers aboard, please. Well, passengers on Pan American flight 138, please proceed to gate number 9. Gate number 9 for immediate embarkation.
Every minute around the clock, they move down out of the skies, down the marked runways, the lighted strips, unload their passengers, their holds, refuel, take on new loads and new passengers.
Now ready, gate 16. All aboard, please. American Airlines.
Now the sky is an ocean, and people sail its seas with shining wings. The sky is an ocean, and the ships, not of wood and canvas, paddle, wheel, and steam, are made of a complex network of electronic nerves worked by men in towers of steel and in cabins of aluminum skin, who guide these fabricked fleets up into the tides and currents of the sky that flow around the lands and waters of the earth. Great fleets of great ships, each powered with the strength of thousands of winged horses, eager for the sky and all the cities under the skies. England, France, Belgium, Holland, Spain, Portugal, Mexico, the East Indies, the West Indies, the islands of the South Seas, of the Caribbean, and of the Mediterranean, the countries of the continents of Australia, Asia, South America, Africa. Lands linked by jet streams of power, girdling all the lands and all the peoples of all the lands. Lands slowly shaped by dreams of man's past and forged into dreams of men living, forged out of the past and into the present, into the dream of the future.
In 1959, a sparsely populated area of New Jersey was chosen as the location for a new airport. It was to be the world's largest jetport, designed for the latest technology in air travel and covering 10,000 acres of wetlands. It was a vision of progress promoted by the power brokers of the day, government agencies, industry, and politicians. But there was something the power brokers didn't expect, an opposition with a way of life to protect and their own vision of the meaning of progress.
Think about what was going on in the 60s with air quality being noticeably bad, water quality being terrible, and people were beginning to get upset with what was going on in the environment.
What was at stake? The way of life of tens of thousands of people.
Basically, this area would have been destroyed. We would have been totally obliterated. We would have obliterated the Great Swamp.
This is the story of the grassroots effort to save a little-known place called the Great Swamp, and the 9-year fight that began in a local high school and escalated all the way to the United States Congress.
Everybody.
So Brooks,
Good.
where would you like to start on this
So
story?
I think, why don't you guys start? You know, this is the anniversary. This is a day. I think a lot of the people that I communicate with on social media are hopefully from the general vicinity, from the area. I think another thing to think about also is this day.
Well, let's set the stage for this day. Why this
Set the
day?
stage for this day, and let's take it from there and see where we go.
Okay, here was the backstory on it. The Port Authority of New York had been looking since the 1940s at building more airports. And one of the things they did at the dawn of the jet age, and we'll get a little more into the details about that, but was in 1959, they were thinking that they're going to need to build a jetport. They would like to put it in a rural site somewhere in the middle of northern New Jersey. And what the Port Authority had been doing since their inception in the early 1920s was when they floated a new project, something like the George Washington Bridge or the Lincoln Tunnel or any of the major things they had done, they would call in their friends from the news agencies. They had a very good PR department, incidentally headed by a woman, which was a real rarity in those days in advertising and press. And they would call in their friends and they would quietly clue them in onto what the plans might be. And then they would say, just keep it under your hat. We'd like your help in seeding the public to make this an acceptable thing. So they'd been doing this for decades. In the late 1950s, they tried the same thing. We're planning on doing something. We think we've got a location maybe in Morris County. And we'd like they called the Newark Evening News in among other news agencies. And they said, we'd like to float this story. Well, the editors at the Newark Evening News thought, this is too big a story. We're not sitting on this. And they broke the protocol of the previous decades. And so even though there were no plans for the airport, there were no drawings, there was no legal documentation, and they didn't even have the rights to the area at the Port Authority to come out to Morris County, the Newark News published, and they went big on the front page, and they said, this huge airport is what's being planned. And all of a sudden, the Port Authority is left scrambling to fill the backstory, to try to keep their proposed project alive in its very earliest days. And the public started going crazy out here in Morris and Somerset. And that's kind of why it started. With the date was only significant in that the editorial board at the Newark News mulled about, I think it was about a week after the quiet press advisory before they went public.
The other reason the date's important is because in 2016, on December 3rd, is when we premiered Saving the Great Swamp, the film at the Mayo Performing Arts Center. So that was a choice to actually release the film on the date of the anniversary of what Larry just described. So it's kind of a double celebration.
Right. It's become an important date, even though it was arbitrary to some degree when it first happened in 1959.
I still don't see myself anymore.
Oh, I see you.
Oh, okay, good.
I see your hand. It looks like an
I'm
1880s
trying to see
Kodak
the gallery, but I see you in the corner, Larry, but I don't see anybody else. I did see, some friends. I know Martha and Pat Wells. Hi. and others as well. So anyway, just to give you another side of the backstory is, I grew up in New York City, but moved to Chatham with my family in the early 90s. And for years I was going to the swamp with my family and just enjoying it as a perk of living in the area without a clue of what happened in the past. And Larry and I met because we live fairly close, and Larry had seen something I did that was broadcast, and we got in touch. We're talking about working on a project for probably 15 years.
It was a while.
Yeah, we became, friends, and had a lot of things in common. Music background and our artistic background, interest in film and history. So Larry also discovered that there was an interest in making a film about the Great Swamp, and that was actually through Nicholas Platt, who was mayor of Harding at the time. And Nick was very interested in promoting the story because he's related. I can't tell because I can't see anybody, but I'm hoping everybody here saw the film because he's definitely a major interview in our film. Nick helped us sort of led us to funders, and eventually we were able to put together a proposal and get the project funded. That was back in 2014. And then for the next 2 years, we were in production. It was a big project for us. So that's a little bit of
that's a great question. Why, this story's obviously, it's been around, for a while. 2014, though, it took that long for somebody really step up. And is it you that finally said, who was sort of the catalyst behind it?
I would think it was
story to go.
Well, Nick Platt was going around the area with a slideshow about it. Because he had, he's related to Marcellus Hartley Dodge, and I think he felt very strongly his connection to the story. And when Larry saw the slideshow, I think that sparked him to suggest making a documentary would be a good idea. So I had some background making historical documentaries and in broadcasting, so that started the ball rolling. But for me, it was more that sort of triangulation of people in the area that kind of got me involved. And then having lived here also, obviously, I was a bit surprised to find out the details of the story. I'd heard bits and pieces of it, but it was more of a mythology. A good guys, bad guys kind of thing, is the environmentalist good, Port Authority bad. And my sense as a storyteller is the stories are always more complicated than that. So I think that began Larry and my kind of looking at how to tell the story in a way that had never been told before, that was as accurate and truthful as possible, and also as full as possible, because there's so much to it. So why it took that long, I don't really know. There are some videos about it. Then there was a great book written about it quite a while ago that became a really great reference source for us, which is entitled Saving the Great Swamp. Right. I have a copy of it floating around here. And it was written in 1978 by a woman named Cam Cavanaugh, who was a retired history teacher and started working for one of the conservancies in New Jersey, and discovered all these papers about it that hadn't been organized or described. So she wrote this book. It's a fantastic discussion. It's out of print, but you can still find copies of it. And Cam Cavanaugh, one of the first things I did was I wondered if she was, by any chance, since she retired in 78, if she was still with us. And sure enough, she was more than still with us. She's a major interview in the film, and she's become a friend. We speak every couple of months. She lives in Basking Ridge, the Fellowship Village, and just a delightful person, So she was at the premiere of the film. She was really supportive of what we did all along the way, and she's the expert as far as I'm concerned. Along with, and Larry was able to sort of connect with her and figure out, okay, what parts of the book do we tell? What do we not tell? What can we fit in our film? What do we have to leave out? So that was, I don't know, there's lots of aspects of the story. I could go on about a lot of different things. So
one of the interesting things I found in the research was that Cam had done the book for the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, which is a very important group here in New Jersey. They really are the successor organization. They're the direct descendant of the group that saved the swamp and got it into to Fish and Wildlife and preserved it the way it is now. And they had a lot of the original documentation. Now, Cam had used that in their old dusty filing cabinets back in 1978. And they opened their files up to us. And when I went up to go and scan and look for more documents and more side stories to see what we could pull, and even graphics and imaging that weren't important for Cam's book as much as it would be for us in the film, I found notes in those files to Cam, kind of pre-post-it note kind of notes
Right.
stuck on the files for Cam. And I found her original sources exactly as they were in the book. And then we were able to use some of those as jumping off points to other places where there were additional documentation. One of the other side of the story, which was the governor of New Jersey at the time, Governor Minor. And he was an alumnus of Lafayette College, where I also graduated with a degree in history. And all of his files are stored there. So I had complete, not only just access, but lots of help from the history department and the archivists there. And that got us a lot of photos and his reminiscences about it from his, including a very extensive oral history done when he left office. So it was, we were able to take Cam's excellent research, which he had started in '78, of pulling all these loose, disparate threads together, and then use that and run with it from there.
Another great little side note, which I find really amusing, is that was at the Morristown Library. Larry, just refresh me.
Which one?
Where Cam's resources were.
No, hers were, for the most part, they're still up at the NJCF headquarters.
I mean, when we went to, we found those six.
Oh, that was the Jersey Jetport Site Association. They're at
right, but
Morris
that library,
County.
that building in Morristown.
Yeah, Morris County Library on Hanover Road.
That's what it is. So we were in the basement, and where the historical and genealogical research area is. We made ourselves comfortable, and all the tables are like dedicated to various people who had either contributed or were important to the library. And we find ourselves sitting at the Cam Kavanaugh table.
Yes.
Little gold plaque on it.
That was yet another library. That was the one that was the Morristown and Morris Township Library that has the genealogical section. So that was a different one. The first research was at Morris County Library. And that
Larry leads me around by the nose to the different libraries, and I don't really know where I am.
All I know is one is an old one and one is a nice new one.
And then, well, they're different old,
Different old, okay.
The one that was most spectacular, of course, was the one at the Newark Public Library, which has all of the Newark Evening News articles and pictures. So we were going into that as well and scanning on site. There was a lot to be had. It's a good story. I was aware of it when I was a kid.
Someone's trying to get a word in edgewise, and I'm wondering who it is because I can't see the gallery view anymore.
No, it's me. I just just sort of probing you guys a little bit here on the topic. Is there were a couple of underlining themes in the film, obviously, and one is did you guys learn there was the grassroots movement that was a storyline, but then there was also, boy, who would have ever thought that anybody would have really wanted to save a swamp? I mean, was that really a true observation of the Port Authority? Did they really think like, well, nobody's going to fight to save a swamp? Was that true?
No, that was exactly it, because in their view, all the progress that they had done with the bridges and the tunnels and the port facilities and the airports, when they consolidated the three major New York airports right after World War II, this was all a lot of concrete and steel, and they would get occasional pushback if a business district was being harmed. But for the most part, it was a wilderness to be conquered by man and turned into a modern technological marvel. So yeah, I think they were caught very much by surprise.
Along with maybe the corporate, the hidden
Port Authority
corporate titans.
Well, there was pushback from the status quo, both universities, Fortune 100 companies in the area, because they had a big stake in this as well, that was not going to be served by an airport. But the Port Authority, I think, was really caught off guard. They had never run into this type of thing.
Also, there was no environmental movement yet, and there was no toolkit. People weren't ready to react to anything that was detrimental to the environment. So that's also caught them off guard. They didn't know how to deal with it when a group of local people got together to try to explain that this could be really damaging to the environment, and it was really the beginning. It was the early stages of the environmental movement, and that's what also makes our film so interesting to a larger audience, because it's one of the first major environmental justice stories, that was where the environmentalists were successful, I think. Yeah.
No, I think I absolutely agree. So what are some of the other underlying themes that you certainly picked up on? What else did you learn, that you'd like the audience to basically say that, boy, as you were filming it or as you were researching it, that you're like, geez, I just didn't really think that, or did it twist? Did it go off in any other direction?
Can you still see me or did I go away?
I can see you.
Still there, Scott.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't see myself. I really wish I could see everybody. I mean, that's an interesting question, but I mean, for me, making a film is always an exploration. And one of the things that keeps me motivated was I'm learning about everything, like as though I'm the audience. So when we kind of figured out who we were going to interview and who would be able to give us various types of background, I would go into every interview, and it was always a surprise. I mean, there was everybody always has something really fascinating to say, and often personal stories, and sometimes it was eye-opening. It wasn't scripted. We kind of built the script from the candid interviews we did with all the people, and we had 20 people that we interviewed. We had over 30 plus hours of interview material that we transcribed and had to be kind of culled down to the final hour, plus write the narration. So it was all a gigantic exploration and finding out a way to tell the story in a way that would flow so I'm sure there were surprises, along the way. I mean, when people would tell personal anecdotes, that was always, I never knew what to expect. I mean, case in point, when Mark Fensky tells a story about having to duck under the helicopter blades, that was, I had no idea that, and that was a delightful moment, because obviously the only reason he bent over was because he thought Stuart Udall was bending over to avoid it, but Stuart Udall was just bending over to shake his hand, with the helicopter in the background. So that was a very funny moment. Yeah. And then there's an awful lot of really pithy comments that everybody made. I mean, Jameson Doig was certainly, such a scholar, and I would ask, questions that I didn't know the answers to. So I would, give a leading question, and somebody would respond, and I'd follow up, and eventually we'd have this beautiful body of material from each person. And then, of course, it had to be edited. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No. So if you look, does someone want to say something?
Can I pop in? It's Ruth Lufkin.
Sure. Ruth.
I was wondering, we don't really hear anything much from the Port Authority. Do they have any kind of a historical arm that, did you make any attempt to try and get commentary from somebody on their side?
Well, I think that Jameson Doig was our coup in that area. I mean, he wrote Empire on the Hudson, which is their entire history. And it was a very, deep, informative, and fascinating story. And it wasn't, biased in any way. And it's still a scholarly book that people refer to. But yes, we tried to reach out to a lot of the heirs of people who were alive back at the time. Most people were no longer with us. There were a couple people who had recently passed away, And then one other thing that I mean, Larry can flesh this out too, is a very sadly, when World Trade Towers went down, that's where they were located, and they lost their entire archive. There was very little in terms of photographs or visual materials or records that we could use from there. So everything we got was from kind of secondary sources, but we were able to piece it together enough, And then, of course, there was the NBC News clip of Lost in Tobin. That was, talk about, Brooks, a surprise. We were looking at at the NBC Universal Archive, and they said, yeah, we have a clip of Austin Tobin. I'm going, oh, well, you know, let's see it. I didn't know what it was. So we had to go there to look at it because they hadn't yet transferred it to video. It was still on the original motion picture film it was shot on. So I'm there on this ancient mechanical editing machine at NBC. This was only a couple years back, and they pull out like a reel of film, you know, and at the time the sound is separate from the film. So it's put up together on the, you know, on the editing machine synchronously, and they roll them both together. And it was a minute long of Austin Tobin talking about the Jetport. And I thought, well, how incredible can this be? You know, it
wasn't like just talking about the Jetport. It was the pivotal moment. The Jetport had gone down in flames, and it was not coming back for the Port Authority. And he's reacting to it in front of the news cameras.
Yeah,
not
so
well.
that was a complete surprise, and it came late in the process, and then of course I had to, you know, I basically, you know, paid to have them transfer it to high resolution video, and from there it came to us, you know, and we were able to use it. So that's another. There's so many stories like that. Every film has all these challenges that you contend with. Yeah. I think I saw Dillard on there for a second. I don't know.
Yeah,
if you can...
oh, hi.
I see you under Adrian's name.
Dillard was the lead contributor to the Saving the Great Swamp project. You know, and we owe him a great debt of gratitude for his commitment to seeing it through, and also, you know, helping to pull together funding from 14 other people actually came in on it through the Community Foundation of New Jersey. To fund it as a nonprofit, a mission-driven project. So I can thank Dillard now in front of everybody too. Again,
honor to work with both of you, and a proud moment, December 3rd, 2016, when we had the premiere.
Thank you. Yeah.
But now take a look at this, and one of the things of some of the, you know, when I forget what it was. Helen that had been talking about sort of the bullseye map. And you look at each, for example, I looked at each one of those rings, and I think when I saw the map, it said it was a mile. So that was going out, I think it was 10 miles. But they also said that this was 10,000 square acres, 10,000 acres. And that would equate to, you know, I know Berners Township is 25 square miles. So this would be more than half of the size of Berners Township. We're talking just the airport, the Jetport property. I mean, as it reverbs out, and I know that Larry, you and Scott talked about this last night when we were doing a briefing, was, well, it's not just the airport itself, but they were talking about leveling mountaintops and to fill in of the swamp. They were talking about infrastructure of spreading between 287 and 78. And they were talking about underground piping coming all the way in from Newark for fuel. I mean, does anybody really understand that just as these guys sprung this idea out, how just massive it would have just ended life as we know it here?
Well, yeah, I think that's why the visionary people, elected officials, freeholders and others, a lot of the captains of industry immediately sprung into action because they knew how disruptive this would be.
Yeah. I mean, it's just is unfathomable to me to understand the scope and size. And when I launched that sort of preview flick of going back to the airport in the 60s and seeing the concept of, you know, Newark Airport and the expanse that it took over, just how interesting it would have been to sort of plop that thing right down here south of, you know, Morristown, New Jersey. But now let's take a look at the other side. And Scott, you brought this up as well, is does the failure of the Port Authority and this Jetport, does it really open the door for really what then became collective conservation and preserving this entire area?
Well, I think it was a bigger movement. You know, the Wilderness Act that eventually saved the swamp was being written, you know, in the early '60s, and it took a long 8 years for it to get passed. So that was all being discussed even before the Jetport story became sort of national news.
Right.
So you know, I mean, the Wilderness Act was passed in '64, but the Great Swamp was not added to it until '68. So it was a special act that enabled them to save the Great Swamp, and that came after a lot of people had to address issues with the Great Swamp that would have disqualified it from the Wilderness Act. I think some of that's in the film, if you've all seen it. I mean, the fact that it was a pretty small parcel of land. It was considered in an urban area. It wasn't anything to compare to the land that was being preserved out in the West. There were millions of acres that were qualified under the Wilderness Act, but you're not allowed to have any man-made structures or any roads, or you can't even bring a power saw into a wilderness area. And so they actually closed the main road that went right through the Great Swamp, which was Marsville Road. Anybody who knows this Great Swamp now knows that you can walk along Marsville Road in Green Village and it just ends. Yeah. And then you can come around the other side and it starts again. It used to go straight through the Great Swamp, but that's gone. And they had to take down some structures. And to this day, you can't bring a power saw into the wilderness part of Great Swamp. You know, if there's some fallen trees on the trails, you gotta take them out by handsaw, by ribbon saws, and they go in there and they do that. They respect that. So the rules are pretty strict for that. You know, the rules are pretty strict for that. But that was all happening as a national movement. You know, it wasn't just the Great Swamp. The Great Swamp, however, was the very first wilderness area to be protected under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Division. There was protections done under other divisions of the government, the Department of the Interior. I'm sorry, I think I got that backwards. It was the first to be protected under the Department of the Interior, which was a unique situation. So that, in that respect, I think the swamp had a bit of a political backing that some of the other areas didn't. So there are all these factors at play. That answers your question, Ruth. You know.
So what have you found? What have you guys found as you've taken this story out around the country? I know you know there's a number of awards that you've received for this documentary. What has it been like taking this on the road to? I know when I saw it at Rutgers Film Festival. You've mentioned that maybe 300,000 people have seen it. Give me an idea of what it's been like taking this story on the road.
Well, I don't know. We didn't take it on the road as much as broadcasting took it on the road for us.
Well, even when they did, I'm sure you got to tag along and hear the feedback.
Well, it's been a pretty much positive response. I mean, whatever happens. I mean, I mean, we have opportunities to show it at local libraries, the Princeton Environmental Film Festival. It's been in other festivals, and reactions are good. We've had a couple of nice write-ups, and the fact that it's also being distributed by APT, which is American Public Television, and that just got renewed to 2022, ensures that it's going to be out, being shown across the country to anybody who subscribes to APT. That's about 350 stations across the country. So far it's been shown on over 150 of those stations in 35 states. So I get reports every once in a while where, they do audience tracking and things like that, But I can't say that, Larry and I aren't traveling with the film or anything like that. It's not like we've been going all over the country. The film has a life of its own, which I really like. And I think it's going to be a bit timeless. That's the way I think when we made the film, we thought we wanted to tell a story that was going to endure. So
I think what's been important too is that since it's been out on all these public broadcasting stations, nationwide. We can't be everywhere. We know that it aired, I think, on all 6 major PBS stations in Alabama, for instance. We didn't go to see any of those, or in Tennessee or in Idaho, but the ones particularly all up and down California and Oregon and Washington. I've got friends in many of those major urban areas where their PBS station showed this, what we were hoping was a universal story and not just a New Jersey story. And the feedback that I got from my friends and associates in those other locations is we hit it out of the park. It was a universal story. So even though the location is New Jersey and 60 years ago, it really resonates in environmental battles and the political battles. I mean, I don't want to overlook that. The first major part of this story was not an environmental battle per se. It was a stop the airport battle that was fought by big business and politics. And there wasn't an environmental movement really to work with yet. So that that built up over time, but during the course of this, because it took almost a decade. But you know, we shouldn't lose sight of that. This was politicians, our congressmen and senators in Washington, our state assembly people and senators, the governor who was very pro Jetport, but not because he was inherently evil, but he saw jobs, union jobs. He saw it as a big boost to New Jersey's economy in that first decade and a half after World War II. So, you know, there were a lot of
I don't think I would have taken this project on if I thought it was just a local story, because I've done a lot of films in the past, and I try to reach the biggest audience possible. You know, I've had PBS audiences for some of my longer films nationally, and the story resonated with me in a personal way because of my family going to the swamp. But I think that a lot of people, when the film was being produced, thought it was going to be what I heard it called a local best effort. You know, and I don't think people knew that I actually was working to very high broadcast standards, and that I also had a vision for the story where I would shape it in a way that it was telling a much bigger message. And you know, it's I think it comes to light at the very end of the film, especially when Cynthia says, you know, that, you know, she remembers her children playing in the woods, and it's still there. I mean, it kind of gives me goosebumps. That moment was incredible for me when I was interviewing her, you know. So there's something deeper in the story. It's about family, about nature, about, you know, preserving what we love. And all that was underlying the film with everybody I talked to in every interview. And I was always trying to get some strong comments from people. And I think I succeeded, you know. Then
that piece with her saying how she, you know, the children were there, and then when she just it comes and she says, and it's still there. That's really, you did get just a perfect moment.
And I knew that was going to be the end of my movie. You know, I interviewed her in the middle somewhere, but I thought, well, that'll be the end.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that you know, for the locals here on the call, I mean, you know, I'm a stone's throw away from it, you know, and when you just go over there, you know, it's amazing. I'll go over and just take my dogs for a walk, or, you know, I'll just go over to even like the Natterer Park, and I'll just lay on the grass and I'll look up. And it's so funny because this area now has, the only thing you notice is I fly for work every week, usually back in the pre-COVID days. And I would always, when I was flying home, I would always be coming right over, you know, Natterer and Basking Ridge, and then swoop up to North Jersey and then land. So now we don't have the airport but we have the flight plan for sure. But I just wanted everybody on the call, you know, to just, you know, just to think about it. And you saw those photos of, you know, when you're going over to Newark, and you sometimes see these airplanes coming like, you know, 100 feet over Route 22, and you just look at it and you go, I just really will stand sometimes in downtown Basking Ridge and just imagine.
Yeah.
You know, and you just imagine what would it be like And I just remember doing research on the stories of the Somerset Hills Airport. And Scott and Larry, we were talking about this yesterday, about how riled up the locals got in the, I guess it was the 70s, after they built a high school next door to that little prop airport. And just the outrage. It was just like, this can't be here. It's too dangerous. You know, there were 2 airplane crashes in like the period of like 3 weeks. And I think there was a guy told me a story. They were testing, I think it was a P-48 Mustang or whatever, a brand new plane. And as they were on the demo ride, the guy landed it right on Maple Avenue by mistake. And that's when they finally came in and said, the town said, no more. It's gotta go. It's gotta go. Next thing you know, they're going to crash in the school, kill all the kids, blah, blah, blah. And I just keep thinking about, when if they put a Newark airport right here, you know?
I was watching the video that you used to start this event off, and it was narrated by Alexander Scorby. You might be interested to know that I recognize the voice immediately. He was the go-to narrator from the 1960s, and he narrated the Futurama ride at the General Motors Pavilion in the World's Fair back in 1964. I was 11 years old, and I must have gone to the World's Fair like 20 times. It was like just a fantasy world for me. But that was what people thought the future was going to be like. And when you go through the Futurama exhibit and hear Alexander Scorby describe how all this incredible technology and cars and soaring buildings, it was just a fantasy. And that's the fantasy that was being held forth, I think, by the Port Authority and all the people who were, eager to build jetports and tear down neighborhoods to put up expressways and all kinds of things like that. And they ran headlong into a couple of problems with the environmental movement, at least. So.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, you picked right up on it. In fact, the 1939 World's Fair Futurama, which was an earlier version, but it was the world of 1960 was what they were predicting. And you can find the YouTube on YouTube. You can find that thing. It's fascinating. Electronic music played on Hammond Novacord, which was really interesting for that score that early on. But the point was that was heavily influenced by what the Port Authority and their kind of frenemy organization, Robert Moses, Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, were doing in New York. So this was the future as it was envisioned, and they kind of got locked into that 1930s vision. They carried it over through the 1964 one, of course, but
and of course 1964 was the year that the Wilderness Act was passed.
So that mentality was still with the Port Authority at the end of the 1950s, when the Morris Jetport concept came into being. And remember, this thing was going to be huge. We keep talking about, it's going to be a big airport. This thing, if it had been built, would still be bigger than Dallas Fort Worth, which I think was the biggest airport. Hartsfield might be bigger now, but one of the largest airports in the entire planet would have been right here in Morris, kind of oozing into Somerset. So you got to keep that in mind. And the Port Authority was, locked into there, as Jim Doig called it, grooved thinking. They had one way of thinking about how do they execute projects. And in the late 1950s, that mindset was still kind of there within the organization, but the world was moving on. So when you think about the 1960s and the anti-war movement and post-Beatles and hippies and the cultural revolution that happened during the 10 years that the Great Swamp Airport project was going down in flames, you can see that, the world had moved on, the environmental movement.
Yeah, that's one thing I kept asking myself, Larry. It's an interesting point that you make, when I was making the film, that all these events were happening during the most turbulent time when I was growing up, in the 1960s. And I was clueless about it, but I'm going, am I making a film about something that matters? I was asking myself that all the time, that's another reason the story is not told, Brooks, I think, because, everything that was happening at that period of history was much more important. There was the Vietnam War, and there was, assassinations, and it was a terrible turbulent period of time, civil rights. And those were the salient issues of the day, not whether to put a jetport in New Jersey, So somehow, we have the benefit of hindsight to kind of reassess what happened. But back then, making a film about this would not be something that would be on anybody's radar.
No, and it probably took a while. That explains, some of the gap in getting it made at that later time period. It was, in some ways, it was kind of an indicator. When we look back with that hindsight of history, we can see this was a tip of an iceberg of very big movement that was going on in American culture, of everything from a more progressive approach to engineering, environment, social dynamics, even governance, how the corporations, which probably would have been lockstep with something like this had it been proposed 15 years earlier than 1959. It changed. So if you watch this one story, you can see all those cultural currents moving the needle over the 10-year period.
Yeah, I think it has a big part to play in it. And just Larry, to your point, I did a search when you said, wow, this airport, just how massive it was going to be. And I just Googled and found out Newark Liberty International Airport is 2,000 acres. This was going to be 10,000. 10,000. Five times bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that, when you go to Atlanta Hartsfield, for example, you always know when you got to get on the, the tram, you got to take the train to the airport almost to get in there. I'm just imagining the train's probably over there in Bedminster over by 287, and then you're taking the monorail over to the Basking Ridge hub to then get on that 10,000 foot runway, which runs basically from Copper Kettle Deli all the way over to Casamaya over there in Myersville. It's huge. It just blows my mind. And that's why this type of stuff, guys, I just want to let you know. I mean, I saw the chat. Obviously, you can get this video on, I just ran just a little watch party before this on Amazon Prime. So if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can rent it, you can buy it. I would certainly recommend everybody do that. This is kind of like a good book just to have. This is something I also want to work as the township historian to get this story into the school system so that not only the high school kids can see it and understand it and actually then go walk through the swamp and see what could have been, but also to just let their parents know that the story existed because, Berners Township had one other event very similar to this that actually happened, and it changed Basking Ridge forever. If anybody knows the story about the VA, being bought by the federal government back in the 30s in 1938 by Calvin Coolidge, that story was, we're picking this spot, Basking Ridge and Lyons, because it had an airport, it had a train station, and it had a big chunk of property that we could build whatever we want on it. And they did. It became the catalyst which changed Basking Ridge forever.
Mouse on his screen.
So, just to let you know that story ties into this one, and this is one that we want to make sure that, again, that people don't forget, because it really is. And Scott, you've done a great service, certainly I know in Berners Township, that I want to make sure that they hear this story. And
Brooks,
yeah,
wouldn't there be a third arm to that theme in terms of when AT&T put their headquarters out here, that was yet another huge change for this
It was
town
it
and
was
the
a huge
area.
change, but that one really came into play right with. There's a couple, and I've got another program that I've run, which is the 10 greatest events in Berners Township history. And certainly AT&T, a lot of people believe that, but the statistics, and again, I wish I had it, I could show it to you guys. It looks like there's the towns in the area, it looks like, I don't know, it runs about 10,000, anywhere from 8 to 10,000, all these towns, Bernardsville, Bedminster, Long Hill. And then all of a sudden in 1938, you just saw a trajectory of Basking Ridge go double, triple, quadruple, tenfold, because people started selling the land, cutting it up, and letting people build. But then you're right, when the Highway Act came through then in the 50s, the National Eisenhower's Act, that certainly did a big piece. And the two guys that figured it out, and Larry, you knew this as well too before, Bell Labs. And even, Bell Labs was, Larry educated me on this yesterday about how they were a little ticked off. They didn't want some big giant airport. They moved out of the city to be here. They didn't want to see the brain drain leave, because this was a neat place for them to be, and that's why there were more patents in that building than anywhere in the world. So I get it, but you're right. That Bell Labs, AT&T, the Highway Act, and this airport could have been right up there. That just would have changed it all forever. It's nice that we've seen, the community adapt to having, two major highways cut right through its core. But the VA was groundbreaking in terms of its capability. So just to let you know, again, I just know that it was a huge thing to, have you guys tell that story, Scott and Larry. And I think that, just a couple of things to share with everybody on the call. I pulled this from the film and some of the background that people just really didn't understand. And Scott, I know you had people discuss it, that, 4 towns would have been ground zero, a couple of your interviews that they just would have ceased to exist. Up to 9 towns were going to be impacted. But the irony of the story, I think, which caught me when I saw the movie, I think for the 3rd or 4th time, was that if it wasn't for this proposal, we may not have been able to save the Great Swamp.
That's what Nick Platt says at the end of the film. It's like if it wasn't for the Jetport, there'd be no Great Swamp.
Yeah,
it was the catalyst.
Yeah,
the irony of that is just something to also share. That sort of pops out if you start to think about it. Which was a great observation. I know we're at the top of the hour. I wanted to just give Scott just a little chance, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about the project itself, and maybe some of the, we call it sort of the FAQs, or the frequently asked questions. I know there were some ironic points, or maybe just talk about well, tell me, you dedicated the movie. There was a dedication right in the beginning.
Yeah, that was my wife.
Very good.
Yeah, okay. She passed away in 2015. Great loss of my life. And, it was in the middle of the film when I was producing it, and we took some time off, and had great continued support from everybody involved who rallied around, Larry and Dillard Kirby and everyone. And, a couple months later, I was back on it. So it was great to have work to do. And that's what the dedication is about.
Great. Okay. Well, what about some of the other things about? So it took you 2 years. What was the crew? Was it just you and
Well,
Larry, or give me an idea what that
no,
was?
filming something like this involves, very high end creative talent, So I have a director of photography I've been working with for 30 years, Roger Grange. We just finished another big project together, and we're working with very, very high end equipment, broadcast quality, incredible lenses. I mean, if you look at all the interviews, you have this beautiful shallow depth of field, where the backgrounds are out of focus, and the interview is in the foreground and very sharp. A lot of lighting. Lighting is key to making everything look as good as it does. The score was written by my son Benjamin, who's currently getting his doctorate in music composition at University of Colorado in Boulder. He's very talented, and actually was performed live at the Newport Jazz Festival the summer before last as well. And I work with him often, so he did a beautiful job. And I mean, the list goes on. There was, if you look at the end credits, I mean, all the people. There were hundreds and hundreds of people who came in in the post-production side. I mean, there's hundreds of archival images. All those had to be obtained, and rights and licenses obtained, and they had to be scanned and touched up in Photoshop. And as I say, it just goes on and on. And then Brooks, you also mentioned you wanted me to tell you about how I got Blythe Danner.
Always my wife's favorite question.
Yeah. So, well, it turns out that the Shakespeare Theater, the New Jersey Shakespeare Theater, which is a nationally known organization that's based in Drew University. Blythe is involved with them. I mean, I think she's helped them fundraise, and as a spokesperson, I don't know for sure, but if she actually performed with them, but she has a relationship with the creative director there, Bonnie Monty. And I was introduced to Bonnie at an event that I was invited to there, and we started talking about the film, which was in progress. And she says, "Oh, by the way, are you looking for a narrator?" And I said, "Well, I haven't decided yet." She said, "Well, let me suggest Blythe Danner." And I said, I hadn't really thought about it, So I because she said that she could at least reach out to her and find out if she'd be interested. So I started listening to her online and her voice and things like that, and she's a mature woman. She's in her 70s now, and but she has what you call a damaged voice. It's a beautiful voice, but it's not perfect, slick voice. It has the voice of somebody who maybe has lived and has some wisdom, and and it was just right, I thought. So I reached back out to Bonnie, and she said, "Well, I'll send Blythe an email." And Blythe responded and said, "Well, have him call my agent." So at that point, it was, I basically took the high road, and I reached out to her through her agent. And it turns out I knew her agent through another agent that I work with. So the conversation was easygoing. There was immediate trust, and then I sent the film to the rough cut to her to take a look at, and she really liked it. So we scheduled the recording for a day that was convenient for her. She lives in California, but she was going to be in New York for a few days. And it took about 2 days in the sound studio to get everything. It was because it's about 25 minutes of narration in the film.
Right.
And, you record paragraphs and lines multiple times because you can give them different emphasis, and we're wordsmithing it as we go. Some of the turn of phrase maybe would be a little different for her than the way I wrote it. So that was the process. And so she was great. We had a really enjoyable time. It was very professional, and it was a privilege to work with her. So that was that story.
Excellent. Well, guys, I know we're going to, here's a couple of the awards that certainly I pulled from your site in terms of what you're getting. So obviously you're getting accolades for the work that you've done, for sure. So I wanted everybody to know that. Again, want to let everybody know that, again, you can follow discussions on Saving the Great Swamp on Facebook. You can certainly watch the film. Again, I encourage everybody to do it. It's on Prime Video. You can watch it for free if you're a Prime member.
There's also, by the way, you know, when we first released the film back in 2016, we created a DVD and a Blu-ray, which nobody uses anymore. But the first year while it was on the air, you know, we sold quite a few because it was the only way you could really see it other than watching it broadcast. And then streaming became ubiquitous, so nobody is buying the discs anymore. But I just want to let everybody know that the discs are still available, and the advantage of the discs is that there's 25 minutes of extra material on them. You know, there are additional clips from all the main interviews and some other, there's a little mini tour of the Great Swamp today. You can see, you know, what it looks like and where you can go. And so you know, for anybody who's really seriously into this film, you can purchase a DVD or a Blu-ray disc through the website.
You might want to mention, Scott, that it's slightly longer, even in the main film, than the one that was broadcast on PBS. It's still being broadcast because that had to fit into PBS 54 or 56 minute hour. This runs a little over an hour, so it's just got a little bit more.
Well, yeah, when we first finished the film, it was an hour and 4 or 5 minutes long, something like that. And I had not yet made the deal with American Public Television, and then of course they needed it to be 57 minutes long. So I spent the next 3 months beating my head against the wall as to what's 7 minutes to cut out of the film. So there's a version that's 57 minutes long that's broadcast. There's a 64-minute version that's the original, which is on the discs. And then there's a 62-minute version, which is somewhere in between, that is what's on Amazon Prime. But the discs have the additional materials, and anybody who is doing any research on this subject might find it interesting to hear more from Cam Cavanaugh and various other people who are, you know.
No, absolutely.
On there, yeah.
Strongly suggest everybody do it. Guys, I'm going to let you go. I think that, but thank you very much for spending your what I call the anniversary day of your event here. Scott, it was an absolute pleasure meeting you.
Thanks for asking, Brooks.
You're local. I appreciate everything you do as well. You know, thank you again for doing it. You know, this is the holiday season. I know it's a weird season for everybody. But you know, our project is still continuing as well. And we would love to be able to have you back again sometime, or once we can get people together, certainly bring you together to, you know, share this story with the community again. I know we did book something. We almost had you in October over at the PAC here in Berners Township. Boy, it seems like forever ago that we planned that, like a year ago, and it just never happened.
No, I remember you reached out to me before the pandemic, and we were going to try to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But everything's changed.
Exactly. I just had something I thought, and again, we're on social media. We'll record this and we'll put this out on our YouTube channel if people want to go back and look at it. But I thought it was also,
you should have told me, man. That's
one thing I just wanted to maybe share as we go out, and you guys can look at this. Is just one thing is there probably is nothing more peaceful than going over to the Great Swamp. And I've tried to take my kids over there when they were younger and try to get them to walk the entire path trail. Forget about it. You could be in there for days.
Are you talking about the wilderness area?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Starting at the EEC and trying to go back in there, you could spend days. I
I actually had some neighbors who got lost.
Yeah,
they had to be rescued. But that's the swamp is divided into two areas. There's wilderness and there's a management area. So don't be daunted, anybody listening, from going there, because the managed area has these beautiful boardwalks that you can walk on above the swamp, and there are these bird observation areas, and there's short walks, and it's just fantastic. I go there. I just was there last weekend just to take a leisure walk, and everyone's wearing masks and keeping social distancing, and it's not ever that crowded. So it's definitely a place to enjoy, even when it's chilly.
So
You'll notice there are snow shots in my film of the swamp too.
your story is going to be well preserved, but I figured I would just let you guys sort of meander through the swamp a little bit as we close out. This is like a 3-minute hiking video of a hiking group I belong to. So I'm going to leave you guys back in the swamp with no Jetport. Thank you, Scott and Larry, for coming. Have a great holiday season. Everybody else, thank you so much for coming. We'll do more of these in the future. Have a great holiday season, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys all next year.
Thanks, Brooks. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Dillard, for making this possible.
There you go. Oop, sorry.
Very short.
Oh, my bad.